Warning, content not suitable for children. Listener discretion advised, yo.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order.
We needed a new world order.
And that great seal of the United States has on it, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the centuries, for the ages, forever.
Create a new world order.
The Drew World Order.
Get your brain fed.
Be able to like speak with people over the world who are passionate about life, and I think that me hanging out with those people or talking with those people, it'll somehow guide me to what I'm supposed to do in this life. So I really appreciate you being here.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, because I can sympathize, and I understand what it's like to be around abusive people, because as an artist, sometimes you're criticized for how you act, perform, behave. As I've gotten older, what I've come to understand is exactly what you're doing. The more that I communicate with people, and even in some cases, put myself in harm's way, not harm's like I'm going to stand in front of a train, but I've put myself in difficult situations. That struggle, although sometimes difficult to navigate, is a big part of the learning experience. And you're coming out of a side of something that is a negative with an incredibly positive attitude, and driven by that passion is the key. And your roadmap will show itself without having to unfold itself. Like it's easy to say and pontificate from the other side of the pond but at the same time, I know from my own personal, even struggling as a dyslexic for so many years, reading and writing, I am where I am today because of that problem. It is a very conundrum in my life that had propelled me to fight for something completely different. Not like with a gun or a weapon. My instruments and the language of what I do is that, if you want to call it that. But I'm glad you said that, because it means a lot to me, the interviews and the connections that I have with people, because what we're doing now, the internet, as young actually as it is, 92 when you think of it, and all this fantastic new technology really in the last 10 to 15, 20 years max, is this whole new level of integrated technology that gives us access to do that. I often talk with my producer, Michael Jack, and he's like, you know, he'll say, like, think about what it was with radio and TV and those two technologies colliding. And all of a sudden, what was born out of that was really rock and roll and the birth of music, because TV went, hey, we're going to take all the Steve Allens and Milton Berles and all those people that were those big radio phenomenons for families around everywhere to TV. They lost all their appeal. And they said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to start spinning all this music. And radio stations popped up because they were available, affordable, antennas. It was a good part of easy advertisement for people. All of that was the birth and the birth pangs of something that was very difficult that people had to make the transformation from, but it birthed something so amazing. What we're doing right now is the same thing. We don't realize it sometimes because we're involved in it. There's so much going on all the time. But I look back and I think, man, what an amazing time we live in. That, like right now, the show we're going to do and the stuff that we're talking about can be watched from somebody to Singapore to Saskatchewan. Yep. And you couldn't do that years ago with little to nothing as far as a budget. So it's an amazing time. You know, as difficult as it is to navigate, like Aldous Huxley said, it's a brave new world, right?
Wow, that's crazy you said that. I tell it to people all the time. It's like it's a brave new world. That's a synchronicity right there. That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
So what I figured is like, we'll, I mean, I kind of do this a little bit differently. When I produce it and put it all together, before like our version starts, I'll do like a little bio of you or whatnot. And then I just kind of roll it into the conversation. So, and that's kind of really what, I guess it's my second one ever. So I might not be like amazing at it, but I just like to have, I'm fascinated by people, like what drives them, you know. And to be honest with you, I'm a music snob, so I love the Grateful Dead. But listening to your music, like I got goosebumps.
I grew up listening to the Dead.
Oh
man.
yeah,
I grew up listening to the Dead.
But
I actually saw their ninth last show with Dylan opening in Highgate, Vermont, in an old abandoned airfield. It was
shit.
It was amazing. It was like 3 days of, are you kidding me? The whole town got shut down. There's nothing. 500,000 people. You know, like at that half is the same as like over than what was at Woodstock, because I think it was like 4 or 5 or something like that. They almost went 500,000. Wow. It was just an unbelievable, and I'm lucky that I got to see that. But Deadhead, right on. Oh
yeah, big time. Yeah. So, and then you know, I got the same. Like music for me is like a religious experience. Like it just something inside you. It starts to like, you get the vibes, the feels, whatever. And I definitely listen to your music. I got that, and I'll definitely listen to your music for a long time after we leave here. And hopefully, you know, we can bring you back on the show. Like this could be a recurring thing. I love having, I just like good people. There's a lot of people in the world that they don't know who they are, and they're putting on a persona or whatever, be it on a spiritual level, metaphysical level, in this material plane. And I just, for me, my thing is, you can be, the world is really fucking weird. It's really weird. And it doesn't like really add to what individuality is supposed to represent. Like people just criticize, like you're talking about, people just criticize people for whoever the fuck they want to be. It's like, you know, it's just because you don't want to doesn't mean that the rest of us don't want to. But I don't know.
I hear that, man. And sing it, because I mean, it's true. And I mean, the world is a crazy place right now, and trying to find some group think or, you know, clature or meme or whatever it is that you want to stand behind sometimes is the most dangerous thing, because it is what you just said, that free thinking mechanism separated from it that allows you to actually make good conscious decisions and decisions based out of clarity as opposed to dogma, which rules so many different things, whether it's politics, religion, sociological idea. It seems to erase common sense, where you're like, you stand back and watch it like it's a car accident, going like, what are you thinking? You know, and it's, well, that's because this is the practice. But that doesn't make any sense. And I think the other thing is important to realize too, is that the cosmos is like, you know, rule of thumb is change is essential. So becoming ensconced and ingrained in one thing for too long is, I think, also very dangerous. You lack that sense of growth and that fear factor, which then pushes you into a new realm. Like you just said, I don't know what I'm doing. You know what? I think that is charismatic, to be able to say that, because you're willing and open for anything. And you were talking about like interviews and doing interviews. Man, the best interviews I've ever had were unscripted, just because we were like two people sitting around talking, listening and sharing. That's what makes it work.
I like
that. And that process of what goes on is what makes people interested. Because, like, you know, I've done scripted things. People send you, here's the questions, or what would you like us to ask you? I mean, Jack, like, you know, ask me whatever you want. Let's have a good conversation, because that's what's going to sell the show, the idea, and all those other things that create that interest, you know? So I'm glad that you're open to that. And I'm the same way. Some people are like, man, you're giving out too much information. You're like an open book. I don't care. That's who I am. So
yeah, me too, man. I have people all the time like, hey, don't you know it's one of the 49 laws of power? It's like, I'm not really wish to have power over anybody, you know? Like I wish to empower people, like just including myself, you know?
Yeah, man.
But yeah, like I've been recently trying to get on this kick of like, all right, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I like to do. I got to fucking create a vision or a plan. Like, where do I want to go with this? So that's recently, in fact, I have it kind of mocked up behind me here, but, first question that comes to mind, or not the first one, but just another question that comes to mind. I heard you mention is it Machu Picchu in one of your songs? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have you ever been there?
It's I don't want to say bucket list. It's on the list. And I'm like what I would, I guess, consider myself sort of an amateur historian, archaeologist. I love anthropology. I love sociology. So the ancient cultures of the world have, like, since I was like, I can have cognitive thought, have fascinated me. You know, like people say, hey man, check out this new car, or like, look at this new app or new phone I got. What really impresses me is how do you move a 200-ton block, cut it free from the earth, and move it in ancient times into position? This is some of the things that stagger me, like watching the sun come up. You know, it's like, wow. Sometimes it's just the sun. You know, no, there's something more sacred to it because of the way I look at it. And some people may say, well, it's neat, it's architecture, it's a pyramid, it's this ziggurat, whatever it might be. But to me, the effort that it took for a group of people to come together in some way, whether it be through some spiritualized, organized thing, whether it be some time marker that they were trying to leave, because I think, you know, setting something in stone, you know, what is it? Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids, right? Like having something like that is so important. And I mentioned Machu Picchu because I love the Aztlan Mayan cultures. There's places all over South America, especially like Bolivia, Pumapunku, places that people don't normally go because they're not the Chichen Itzas and they're not the Machu Picchus. But having that language in there, in that tune, was sort of the little bit of allegory from my life, because where that's from is a tune called Red Omen, which is an anagram of my own name. And
holy cow,
I want to, yeah. So as a dyslexic, I was like, hey, you know what? How more appropriate, you know, can it be that ended up being that way as the title of the tune, and telling this sort of story, both factual and fictional, about who I was and the struggle I sort of personally had hidden inside the message that I struggled with in terms of dyslexia. And interesting that you mentioned that, because we were talking about different things, problems turning into empowerment, that reaching out through, you know, a couple of years, to tell you the truth, with that tune sitting on the album as the title track, found an incredible animator who, you know, was doing work for like Disney and Teletoon, and, you know, SpongeBob SquarePants is some of his work, Kung Fu Panda 2. Nelson loved the tune, and just like Kismet with certain things, he was like, I was just at Machu Picchu, and 6 months ago I sent out my portfolio to bands and stuff, trying to, like, you know, do this collaborative stuff. So it's really interesting that you contacted me. And he loved the tune, and we birthed this really neat cartoon, which sort of tells the whole story. And on a further note, as a dyslexic, I reached out through Michael Stover to the Dyslexic Society in the United States, based out of California, the Davis Dyslexic Society. That's Ron Davis. He's a sculptor and a dyslexic himself, but he developed this sort of three-dimensional comprehension version of education for children that struggle. And factions now and facilitating offices exist right across Canada in every province. So that tune ended up becoming the figurehead and vanguard for raising awareness. And to date, almost over 40,000 extra Canadian dollars were raised for facilitating programs for kids all over Canada. Mm. So it's that negative of like, man, I can't tell you how much I struggled in school, but at the same time, I like using language in colorful ways. One of the things I was so impressed by as a young person listening to John Lennon is the way that he would, you know, color things in ways that wouldn't be literal, but would allow the listener's mind to conjure its own pictures and ideas. And with the same thing, that's what I was really trying to do with Red Omen. The line is, you know, going to a UFO base camp up on Machu Picchu with Jimi Hendrix, right? Like, and I love Jimmy. Jimmy was like a huge, you know, fan. I was a huge fan of Jimmy's, and at one point in time, I was like, you know, everything I was into, it was Jimmy. Just like I study a lot of bands, Tower of Power, Mingus, Jaco Pastorius. There's so many artists that I've almost taken on as sort of like a university degree, listening to them and everything, you know, that revolves around why they did what they did. So I had to write that in there too, because Jimmy was such a huge influence to me, and like he was to so many other people. But yeah, I want to go there. Hey man, if you want to organize a trip, I'll go.
Hey, I was just gonna say, like, I'll see if I can't make something happen. Like, that'd be awesome, right? We'll take a documentary crew with us or something.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Reason to actually start talking about the video and stuff. It's like, here we are at Machu Picchu.
Yeah, that'd be. Turn my phone down. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So, how many instruments do you play?
Well, I could categorize it into like 3. Because string instruments, span the gambit for me. There's a lot of symmetry to string instruments. And I always gravitated, for some reason, there first. I was always enamored by, like I said, people like Hendrix and people that just pull out an acoustic somewhere and started playing and singing. That instantaneous, you don't need a piano. It's heavy, it's big, keyboard, synthesizers. We had a piano in our house. I played it when I was a kid. But it wasn't something that electrified me the same way. So when I got to high school, it was like, formed the band with guys and we had a lot of fun, but nobody wanted to play the bass. Like, they all wanted to get girls and play the guitar, be up front and do what they were going to do. So I'm like, I'm going to give it a shot because there's something to this. There's something else. And right around that time, I was given a couple records by a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. We grew up together. His teacher from his high school gave me 2 Jaco Pastorius records. His first solo record, and I think it was a live album, which was Invitation. And he just said, here, if your buddy Ed's going to play bass, he should listen to this cat because he's, And I just followed it wholeheartedly all through high school, college. But the thing is that I think all musicians are drummers. So categorizing number 2 would be percussion stuff. I was the kid that had the jam place in the basement or the bedroom because my mom and dad would let it happen, just like a couple other kids that, buddies that grew up. So I always had a drum kit at my disposal. And I had one set up at the end of my bed in my bedroom. And in the morning, I just get up and I just start playing just because it was fun. It was cathartic. There was something about that sort of meditative aspect to it. And what I didn't realize is that I was enjoying it so much that I was learning through that process. So with the stringed instruments, then it's bass, it's guitar, it's banjo. I play some sitar now because I bought a sitar a little while ago. But anything like string related, yes. Percussive, I play drum kit. I play like hand drums of all different kinds. So, that's from the percussive world of things. Keyboard was always the last for me, even though we had the piano sitting right there in the house. So only in the last about 15 years of my life have I really picked up. My buddy gave me his old Fender Rhodes piano. I got a Hammond over in the corner with a Leslie. All those eclectic instruments seem to really resonate with me because they're there at that baseline tactical level. And as a dyslexic, it's so important to me to have a physical 3-dimensional environment for me to behave in. And it's not like a piano is not 3-dimensional, but somehow there wasn't, I don't know, it was even more of a challenge somehow to be able to, you sit and you play a key and you have a perfect note through, its execution. With a guitar, it takes time to develop calluses and learn how to place your fingers and understand positionings, and it's a lot of extra work. But somehow that struggle was a part of like achieving something, like, I could do this, and I want to learn that tune. And buddies that were all in high school and stuff were always challenging each other. Like, I learned the extra 2 bars to that. Did you? And then we go home and like you try to get an extra 2 bars past him or whatever, right? Whatever it was. But it was all healthy. And today I will always put myself in harm's way when it comes to instruments because I find it really humbling. I find it taking me back to those infantile feelings. And I'm infantile, not in like, I'm a suck about it, but it's just the experiencing of excitement of touch and perceiving what it represents without all the technical stuff that's always kind of going in your mind as your principal instrument maybe sort of dictating on a regular basis. So it's a nice departure. And then when you come back to your own instrument after those experiences, you start thinking a little differently about your own instrument again. So I find that elastic kind of thing, really important for me. And so I don't know, I guess between all the guitars and the percussion and some keyboards, maybe there's 10 or 12 different instruments
That's
I never gravitated to brass, but that doesn't mean I won't try one day.
yeah. And as somebody, music for me, like I used to play the trumpet, and I've tried to play the guitar. I probably wasn't as patient as I should have been, but and musicians, certainly, at least how I perceive things to be, like are some of the most creative like people on the planet. So I respect the hell out of you for, I mean, just it's pure creativity, and that what you were talking about, that like wonder, that beholdment. It reminds me, you see, like when you look at a kid, kids walking around wherever you are. I used to run the youth sports league for years, and the thing that used to just fire me up so much, and I've moved on to some other things now, but kids, they just have this look in their eye, like everything they look at is just like, whoa, you know? And I think that we, as we get in to be adults, like we lose that somewhere. I don't know where, I don't know how. I mean, I know a little bit of what society does to us and the powers that be or whatnot, but I think the goal should be for adults to, and you're one of the few human beings that still has that wonder, that look in their eyes. And that's something that I really appreciate. And it's like a goal. It's like this is what I'm trying to get people, like, be more like Ed, you know, or whatnot. So,
man, I appreciate that. Yeah. But you know what? You're right, because kids are amazing. I work with a lot of kids, autistic kids. I wish I had kids of my own. And I'm a big kid at heart. And I think that's important to remember as a person. I learned that from my mom, my grandmother. You know, they always had this sort of lightheartedness about, and, you know, comedic and sarcastic sometimes, to the point that, you know, my grandmother could have done a stage show sometimes, like the way that she would, you know, operate. But she was very sincere also at the same time, right? So I think I learned that from them. Even today, when I talk to my mom were like, we make, you know, I'll call her and she'll go, hello. And I'll go, and she'll be like, you know, we start just like, you know, doing fun things, because like you said, the world is a crazy place. And I think with what even my own family lived through, coming from Europe in the 1920s, at the height of when the war was as crazy it was, my grandfather was disowned by his family because he wanted to come to Canada. Half of my family were killed in what happened in the war. They came here with nothing. My grandfather started collecting scrap iron to sell to make money. My grandmother scrubbed floors for Mr. Heinzman, the guy who made pianos. In fact, the piano I have today was a gift from my grandmother's work, servitude, basically, for like 20 years of service. Working for Mr. Heinzman. So that story and what they went, and then, you know, graduating through this process of hard work to realize that, you know, we can feed our children, we can have kids, they can then have kids. That fecundity, it was always illustrated me through hard work, levity inside of it. Levity is the key, because there's always going to be some craziness that's going on in some kind of way, whether catastrophically or, you know, whatever it might be. Getting through that in some way with that mechanism is also a big part of the health and well-being of how I feel today. People say, well, you're a joker. I used to get criticized in school all the time. Maybe it was even a defense mechanism for being overweight as a kid and struggling with dyslexia. But I also realized at a young age it was a very powerful tool. And it may not have cut well in a classroom sometimes with a teacher or whatever it may have been. But as an adult today, I understand its potency. And people that I've met around the world that aren't as fortunate as maybe some North Americans are that way. They have levity when they have nothing. They have humor when they have nothing. They have all the simple basic tools that keep that sense of survival alive, because there's always the compression of existence. Right. I think that's a big part of the key.
Oh, and I tell people, I've told somebody in the last like few months, it's like they seem to live in their own little bubble and want to talk about how bad or how rough they've had it. And I've asked them, like, why don't you turn on like a National Geographic or watch a documentary on Uganda or go anywhere else or look anywhere else in the world? Like you think you have it this bad? Like it's very, very, it's almost a slap in the face to like what real resolve and grit and just the purpose or the definition of what perseverance means. And it's really, I think, especially here in America, I haven't been outside the country ever, but I look around and my peers, like, nobody wants to be accountable. No, everybody wants to blame other people. Everybody's the victim. It's like, well, all right, what are you going to do with that? Like, how do you respond to that? I read a quote one time, Charles Lindahl, 90% of the things that happen to us in life, we have no control over, which leaves 10%, which is our attitude. And so many people just want to take the low road and either quit or just continue to be not accountable for things. And it's like you said, it's a brave new world. And at some point, the chicken's going to come home to roost, because the people that run the world, like, they are using that to divide and conquer us and to separate where they are from where we are. And it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. We could live in a really peaceful world.
Well, and you know what? I think you're right. And I think the mechanism of how it all works is chaotic. That's why it works. And accountability is one thing. Taking responsibility for your actions, whether they be good or bad, is extremely important. And whether you're humble enough to recognize it, the negative side of it is one thing. Whether you're giving enough to be forgiving of it on the other side is just as important. We stand betwixt so many different social disorders and people all really wanting the same thing. I could point that out when it comes to certain things with politics or religion or so many other where you would think diametrically opposed opinions would rule, but really there's a lot of similarity. And the commercialism, materialism, there's a lot of isms that seem to really perpetuate the idea of the segregation of those things and allowing it to flourish so it becomes chaotic, as I say. And out of that, other people can reap the rewards of what it is, whether it's gleaning information or, monies or obtaining power in some kind of a way. And that's why it is a crucial time to be cool and calm and also like to point out things without being, as we said before, character driven in terms of assassination. I mean, I often think about what's going on right now between, and I don't even want to go down this road, but it's like the black and white issue. I have a lot of friends that are black, white, Jewish, Colombian, Portuguese, Spanish, Slovak, Ukrainian. They're from all over different parts of the world. As a gardener, I understand that community gardening, cross-pollination is one of the most healthiest things that you could have for a garden. It is that very thing that creates the fruit and the sustenance inside of what your efforts, right? So I often say to myself, well, like, I could sit around and say, I'm going to hold all Russians accountable because of the over 30 million Poles, Slavs, Ukrainians, Croats that was killed during the Stalinistic regime, either sent to the Gulag or just extirpated as a result of who they were as people. The Jews could say the same thing. Blacks could say the same thing about slavery, the issues and injustices that they're experiencing across the United States and Canada. All of those kinds of things are omnipresent. I think it's all important for us to realize that none of us, are immune to whatever treachery or, the byproduct of somebody's ignorance or maliciousness or ego has forced us into. I think what's more important is people need to illuminate that we're all people. We all have something really valid and important to be able to offer. The mechanism of the things that we're forced, like you said, children, they don't seem to be colored by so many different things in terms of like, I have this opinion now and other kids are very open. Well, maybe we can. They always have that optimistic opinion about, yes, we can, And I think that's an important thing to think about because as an adult, we're so geared towards that conditioning that it's very difficult for us to step outside of that to say, I'm going to walk down the center of this razor, as sharp as it may be, to try to understand more about what's going on either side of this. If I get cut in the process, well, that's my choice. But at the same time, being on either side of that seems to be even more dangerous than crossing that razor at this moment. Because there's not a lot of clarity. I've seen other things that aren't being like mainstay media is like I always say is things that are incredible that have been achieved by some sort of public group, whether it be like here in Canada. About 3 years ago, it was an older group of people that actually took the Bank of Canada to court because of misuse of funds and injustice. In terms of injustice, the way that funds were newly expropriated and being utilized. So I always talk about the Bank of Canada because the sustainability of economics inside of a nation is extremely important. And for instance, between the 1920s and 1974, the Bank of Canada issued money that was based on a gold or silver standard. So that meant that with that money, we could give money out to people coming back from the Second World War to buy land and have farms. We built the St. Lawrence Seaway, hospitals, Trans-Canada Highway, a multitude and an incredible amount of infrastructure because of that money that was based on that standard. In 1974, the Canadian Bank basically opened their money to private money lending with interest. And between 74, we had $18 billion in debt, which on a national level, when you think about where we sit today, as far as national debts are concerned, absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
and between 74 and 84, the tally went to $480 billion with interest in Canada alone. That's the private money lending. So where am I going with this? I guess the idea of economics and what's going on in sustainability, we're talking about the differences in culture. Oh, geez, I sort of lost my train of thought here. But yeah, I guess what I was getting at is that in essence, we all have something very valid to offer. We can point out all those different kinds of things that are wrong, but ultimately there are far greater things that are important to pay attention to. So that's what it was. That kind of story doesn't make it to mainstay news. It's not on any of the national stations. It's maybe in a little clip about this big in a newspaper. Nobody knows about it. And major politicians have been asked questions. Hey, what do you think about the Bank of Canada? Ignore the question, skirt to da-da-da-da. So I tend to focus on things and keep talking about those things, the feel-good stories about the potential that we do have as people, so we don't get caught up in this crossfire. The crossfire is always there. It's always being talked about. It's always being pointed about the differences. This person, it's responsible. They're responsible. We're all responsible.
Yep.
We live on this globe together, and pretending any other way is ludicrous. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So fighting about it isn't going to help either. Supporting each other is the key in whatever way, especially even the people that we may not even understand. I'm sure when I entered the music business and started playing music, my mom and dad, they didn't get it. My mom knew I enjoyed it. She tried to help in whatever way that but she's not a musician, but she embraced my love for it and allowed that to flourish. We have to do similar things. We may not understand everything in its entirety about a certain situation. We need to be pragmatic about what it represents and whether it has any validity or it's healthy for a group of people. But at the same time, we need to move on from all the wrongs that we keep accusing each other from and of, to realize that there's so many new things to be created as a group. We can keep all the bad. It's so easy to point. It sells papers. It makes people go, oh my gosh. That's why music and art for me is that incredible challenge. It forces me to look at all that in a way that maybe sometimes scares me even, but it allows me to revent it in a way that hopefully lets people navigate in a more healthy and calm way, even if it is a little aggressive.
Well, that's the interesting theme the last few weeks for me has been take a deep breath, calm down, cool off, be relaxed. Because you can't, if you run into this world on fire with a torch, that's just going to add to the fire, So what do you say to somebody who either has a passion in life or has a certain creativity that they can sense, but they might shy away from or be worried about what people think or say or whatnot? How important is it for you I guess, what would you say to those people that are on the fence about, well, do I express my creativity or do I just, revert back and be a conformist or whatnot? Because I'm all about embracing your individuality, no matter what it costs you. It's the only gift. It's what God gave you, and He gave you that set of specific tools, resources, whatnot, unlike anybody else's arsenal.
Well, yeah, that's an amazing question. And you know what? I think living creatively is a big part of it, because aside from like what I practice as a musician, the technical aspects of it, I now see more of all those sort of, like, I would say, developed, how might you say, not dexterities, but ideas about philosophy. Music has a philosophical aspect to it, it has a physical aspect to it, it has a historical aspect to it, because you're searching for different things. Certain kinds of music from certain eras may turn you on to certain kinds of things. It may navigate its way into what you do. There's so many different things that are happening in the musical process that now I see that art form translating into other parts of my life that aren't necessarily musically related, that are part of my musical thinking process in terms of how my mind uses music, and then it relates to something else somewhere. The creative process will find a way somewhere else. And I like that. I like being like, how do we get this thing up in the air to be able to hold water and then have just a gravity fed system? What do we have around to be able to build? Do we have an old tank? Do we have some lumber? Does somebody have some screws? Who has a hose? How do we, even if it's out of nothing, even if it's out of junk, there is this artistic mind at work utilizing shape, idea, concept, breaking things apart, putting things back together again, flipping it in certain ways so it changes its idea and its meaning. That, with whatever anybody does, whether it is an art form or selling shoes or being a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon or a tap dancer, that is the exact same sort of mechanism that I'm getting at. It's driven by passion. It's like, it's crazy to say, but I learned so much other than technical things living on a farm. And what I learned was the passion through failure. That something didn't work that we planted, something that we worked really hard on didn't work. I've experienced it this year with my cucumber crop. Completely lost everything as a result to a mold that's all over the Great Lakes area, from, Wisconsin, New York State, Pennsylvania, all the way to Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba. Dang. Thousands of hectares of cucumbers have been lost, right? But I know my efforts weren't in vain because of the way I'm thinking about it. I know for next year I'm going to prepare differently. I might be thinking about how I'm going to prepare my crop, the way I'm going to grow it, where I'm going to plant it. All of those things are part of the artistic mind. They don't necessarily have to be framed into something that we know as a practice of the art world. Like I said, sculpture, dance, music, whatever it might be, the things that we know are part of the art world. I've had people that have sold me a pair of shoes that I think are artisans because of the way they do what they do, because of the way that they live their lives. There's a cat in Los Angeles that paints houses. He wears tuxedos and roller skates. And while he's painting, he's wearing roller skates and a tuxedo. And his whole thing is, if I fall or get any paint on myself, your painting job is free. But he's skating around like he's at a roller park and he's doing all this stuff. That guy's a painter. Somebody says he's a painter. But what he's done is an art form. He's created this thing in a way that not only has made people go, holy cow, that's crazy. He's enjoying the experience. It's driven by his passion to be something out of the ordinary. People might say, that's crazy. Like, how are you going to get? It doesn't matter to him. He gets the job done, and he has a lot of fun doing it. And wow. I commend people like that in any part of their walk of life, so that you can understand that the artistic mind can exist somewhere else without the framework of what we know it to be. It's everywhere. And I see it happening all the time. There's these kids that come by my place with like, they're building, and I know they're like trying to figure out, how do we build this coaster for like hills that can be partially battery operated, you know, so they're taking apart these old scooters and they're modifying them and doing all that. I'm like, when they go by, I smile, because I know what they're doing has this creative sense of, let's rip it apart and see what else it can do. When I see stories, I saw this one guy who built his own bionic arm in India, and he works in this like scrap electrical yard where televisions, computers, actuators, all sorts of stuff have been coming in for years as like junk. He's figured out a way to build his own actuating arm with all this junk. Like that is an artisan in action. Da Vinci was the same way. As we know, as Da Vinci, he's like, yes, a great painter. But the man was pulling apart bodies in the basement of the catacombs of the Vatican when it was against the law to understand the mechanics of how a human body works. He is the one who gave us some of our first insight as to how the muscles work, tendons are connected to bones, all because he was this, you know, driven by this idea that like, I'm going to steal bodies and go to the very place that they would look last, to the catacombs of the Vatican, and do this work. That is driven by passion. The machinery, some of his ideas in fluid dynamics, they're all just because he's driven by that excitement of what if. And I think everywhere it's around us, everywhere I look, I can see it. I gravitate to it musically because that is my tactical response. So I would say to anybody, it's everywhere. And it's happening every day. Every day.
Like I can't believe I've never heard of that guy. I've never heard of these stories. That's part of the sad thing about the news or whatnot. Like, you would think that if we really lived, or if we really were run by people who had our best interests in mind, like that stuff would be on TV. That would be out there. Like, I would have heard about it. Now I'm just a guy from Kansas, you know, and we just invented the typewriter like last week. But it's just, it goes to show, and I tell people all the time, like the power of the human spirit. Like people will approach me like having trouble getting through a situation or whatnot. Like, you have no idea how powerful you are. You have no idea how creative. You just have to, you got to step outside your comfort zone a little bit. And that's just what you said, like resonates big time with me.
I said that to somebody the other day. She's a journalist, and I said, you know, you're really good at what you do, and you have so much potential, and you're, you know, and she was like, really? And I said something very similar. I said, like, as a dyslexic, we're kind of out here in conversations. Like, if I'm talking to somebody, I'm still out here watching the conversation and weirdly analyzing it and being like the third party. And we don't do that enough to see our own potential. Living for so long with a lot of self-esteem issues that were driven by dyslexia, I know, even in that tune we were talking before, I didn't believe in myself, if no one else, to be making voodoo music in some small town way up in Canada. Belief in oneself is one of the most crucial things, but it can be also the most hardest to find, is that belief in yourself. There's so many things that are always criticizing you. Look at commercialism. Commercialism is a prime example. It's just, if you don't use this toothpaste, if you don't drink this beer, if you don't go to this store, if you don't watch this show, if you don't have this app, it's always about these things that are telling you what is wrong with you. And there's so much beauty everywhere in the difference of how people are that it's almost creating a homogenized version of a human, as opposed to it being, you know, just a free thinker, right? So, you know, again, it's everywhere. Those feel-good stories and people doing amazing things are happening all the time. And shows like this and other things that are talking about that is the prime key, is just to keep pushing it out there. What's the turtle and the hare, man? It's like people like, the rabbit's fast, look how quick it is. Yeah, but the turtle won. Mm-hmm. In the last 6 years of my life, Drew, 7 years, it's like, okay, so I signed with Michael back when, but it's really only in the last year and a half that I've really felt like the hard work that we've been doing, and it's taken a long time, and people are like, well, you know, sometimes there's not a lot of reward. Why do you keep doing it? Because I'm driven by it. I'm driven by the passion behind what it is. And I'm not going to stop because I love it. Why would I stop doing something that I love? Even if sometimes it brings me difficulty. But now the turtle is looking back going, there's the finish line. I'm right there. There's the rabbit's asleep. And I'm about to cross it. And that there's never a finish line. That's what I've realized. That it's like in Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist. You know, we always think that the finish line is the goal. You know, and it's okay to rest on your laurels and, you know, make some money and pay your bills and things like that. But what I learned from that book was that it's the journey that is the gold. It's not at the end. That's yeah, you know, the icing on the cake, but it's not the cake. It's the people we meet, the experiences we have. All of that is teaching us far more about the life experience than just the reward itself. So, you know, I'm always reminding myself of that there is never a finish line until they put me in the ground and I'm pushing up daisies.
I got a couple of observations. Number one, like, your vocabulary, like, is fantastic. Like, I love your vocabulary. Like, I just like some of the words you use is really kind of blow my mind. Number two, like you have this vibe or this sense of just purpose. It's been a little bit of a weird day for me, and I've just kind of been, and whatnot. But I got on here with you, and like, it reminds me of like what I'm passionate about and what I like to do, and how important it is that, regardless of how many people I get to watch my show or listen to my stuff, it's like, I love to do it, you know? And it kind of reminds me, takes me back to why I originally started doing this stuff in the first place. So I appreciate you doing that for me, and I appreciate just you broadcasting that vibration. What do you? How important is it to be patient? I guess because I hear so many people are not patient, and I lack that sometimes too. But like you said, you signed with that guy 7 years ago. The importance of patience and just remaining calm and cool and just staying the course.
Well, you know, I'm human just like you, and like you admitting it too. I can lose my patience, but it's funny. As I get older, it's more on things where everything has been dealt with, scripted, and you figure out there's a plan, and then all of a sudden the plan starts to fall apart. But it's because, you know, somebody didn't come through, that fell through, whatever it might be. So I kind of getting to that point. Well, you know, my dad had this philosophy. Well, it wasn't meant to be. You know, is that part of the equation? I don't know. We all were in on it. You know, everybody was on the same page, but it didn't work. So I can get a little frustrated because I'm like, hey, this is what we talked about. Like, where is everybody? You know, like, but it's funny how patience for me through that way of artistic thinking is also a part of it. Being a gardener has taught me a lot of patience. Being a musician has taught me an incredible amount of patience. Patience for different kinds of things. I have a lot of patience for children, maybe when people don't, because they can be noisy and messy. And I can be type A and very tidy. My studio is very tidy and stuff like that. But I like it when kids are just throw stuff everywhere and are coloring on things and blocks all over the place. I remember myself that way, and my parents letting that happen and letting the creative mind roll around on a regular basis, right? So, but patience, like that, again, the failures are the things that have taught me, though, that sense of patience. It's different than like traffic patience, you know, where like you're trapped in the vehicle for 2 hours and you're on the highway. Mm-hmm. you know, it's like turn on the radio, figure out something to do, you know, just to kind of text somebody. And that's a different kind of thing, right? But the art form itself, it's hard to do something sometimes on an instrument. Some people may say, I don't want to, it's too hard, I can't do it. Yeah. The students that I used to have would be like, you know, I can't, it's okay that you can't do it yet, but by working at it, you will. And it's funny that you say that, because when you're excited about an idea and you want to learn it and work on it, that's where you make the most mistakes sometimes, because you're rapidly accelerating your thinking process about, I'm going to get there. But the more that you slow the process down to understand the mechanics of it, to then gradually speed it up perhaps to where you need it to be, is a part of that learning experience. And it's a humbling experience, because you can't just sometimes you can just jump into something because you get it right away, but other things can be tricky. And again, that's taking a breath. So maybe it's going to take a week or so, maybe it'll take longer. But that sense of patience is again, always illustrated to me through the process. And not only that, releasing my ego from that process so that it doesn't feel that way. It's so funny. People say, well, how do you write a song? Like, what do you do? Like, do you sit down with a guitar or a bass or drums or lyrics or da 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 da? I don't know. I know, but I don't know. I never have a process to what I do, because I think that's unhealthy. Again, it's putting everything in this, I have to be this way cosmetically continually through my process. I may have a pen, a piece of paper, an instrument, but that's always going to change, because that could be a napkin, a crayon, and just my own thinking process until I get somewhere to be able to work on something. But it's the catalyst that says to me, this is what you're excited about. Then I have to forget who I am and worry about what I think should happen through what the catalyst is exciting me about. That's what I do. I actually learned that from people like Tom Waits or Keith Richards. They've talked about this in some documentaries where they'll say, the experience is actually pulling me through it. I shouldn't be the one shoving my experience through it, because I already have that experience. Nothing is going to change for me inside of that experience if I keep it the same way. So if I allow the catalyst, the idea, to pull me through it, everything changes for me. There's this whole new experience through that process. In the last bunch of tunes that we just finished recording and releasing, what I've enjoyed so much about it is having even more people's input, releasing more of it to other people and saying, well, what do you think, Mike? What do you think, Tobias? What do you think, Dave? I've always kind of had that healthy mentality to stuff. I've maybe been more of the steward and the captain of the facilitated idea. But what I stand back and listen to now is this, oh man, I had no idea. It could be this way. It's not exactly what I wanted, what I expected, but it's more than what I expected, because I'm not so worried about what I think it should be. It already is that. Because the excitement and the catalyst is there, it's there. The important thing is that you keep listening to the messages and the monikers as you go through it to figure out what else needs to support that catalyst. Because that's, as a musician, the other thing in terms of patience and stuff, how do you support? As a background musician, I was, a side man for a lot of bands for a lot of years. I wasn't always a lead singer or the front man of a group, but knowing what that support is and allowing the performer to pull you through the experience is just as important as delivering the performance. So again, I'm always humbled by that moment. It took me a little while. That's been more my feeling in writing over the last 15 years, that I'm not going to predicate any of my thinking on what I think it should be. Or, hey, I wish it was like this tune. I love that tune. So I'm going to, that tune already exists. The framework is kind of already existing there. I don't want to be that. I want it to be what it wants to be. And it's funny because now that experience has translated into the recording process, how the music is captured, how people interpret it, and even again, how even the public relations of it starts to reveal itself without it saying, well, no, we're going to go and do and do all this, because let's see what it is as a catalyst pulls people out to grab onto it. And that's trial and error. That can be patience too. And it can be frustrating as well. But the important thing is that we're continually doing it. We're continually putting it out there, and it's always changing. That's what I like about the experience. I don't want anything to be the same. People, I like people when they say, hey, I write a tune like this. I love that tune. I know, and I'm so happy that you love it. But I don't want to write the same tune just 'cause. It's not. And it's commercially, that's what maybe they're thinking, like, oh, it's great, and maybe made some more money and or whatever it might be, but it's there already. It's there already, you know? So a big part, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
I'm just going to say, this is kind of, I don't know why, but I think this is going to be the question I ask everybody, because I'm always fascinated by this question. And I asked James, and I'm just getting pulled into asking you now, what do you see as the difference between ego and confidence?
You know, that's an interesting question coming up from you because of the relationship stuff we were talking about in different points in time, because this is what's really interesting for me right now. Some people may have criticized me lately saying that I'm egotistical because I use social media like social media uses me. I'm not afraid to show my accolades and awards because it's part of what is the norm. It is part of what is advertising for me and what I do. I'm not there to thrust it in people's face if I'm winning something or there's something positive that's happening. I'm utilizing media like it's gleaning information from me. If it happens to be something that's always positive for me and people are upset by it, then I would say that's character assassination and their own ego in a state of an inferior feeling because I'm achieving something that I've worked so hard at in my life.
Exactly.
That I've struggled with immensely in my entire life, you're going to criticize me for that and now call me an egotist. When I feel confident is by saying, well, I can play that. I can do that. I have the confidence to be able to stand up in front of thousands of people and sing and talk to them. That's confidence. That's not actually, there's more relinquishment of my ego in that moment to be confident, to be able to feel that way. If I allowed my ego to rule that moment, I would actually maybe be more afraid than people would realize. Just like a lot of people, like, I'm not getting on a stage in front of thousands of people. That's crazy. What am I? No, you have to forget about your fear. That's your ego. Mm-hmm. You have to relinquish that to be able to be, in the weirdest of ways, I'm lucky that I've never created a strange persona of myself. I can just be myself. So I'm comfortable talking to people. But again, I'm relinquishing that part because every night is different. Every audience is different. Every experience is different. So like the writing experience, I can't predicate every night, and say it's going to be the same. The audience might be tired. They might not be into it. They might be really into it, whatever it is. So I think it's healthy to think about it that way as well, too. So the difference I see is that, like, people can be egotistical and be like, well, flaunt some money and some material things like, well, we're going up, and, got the cars and da-da-da-da-da and the horses. And sometimes these people don't even use these things. They just own them to say that they can have them, right? Like, how many times I've been to, like, mansions in people's places and I'm like, how many of those do you have? Well, we don't use them. What? You have a swimming pool and you don't use it. No, we don't use the swimming pool. Like, you have all this stuff, but why are you requiring it? What is the purpose of it? Because again, commercialism is telling them this is what makes you potent and powerful. It's not. The things that again, it's like, so that's ego, like in its state of insecurity again, showing all of this stuff to say, well, I'm good because I own all of this stuff. It's not. It has nothing to do with that. So it's funny because that was sort of some interesting feelings that I've been feeling even amongst peers and friends. I even asked one buddy, I said, why like all this stuff? I said, we're talking, I said, why didn't you ever like even hit the like button or send me a message saying, hey man, I'm happy for you or whatever? He just told me flat out right. And I admired him for it. I said, I was jealous. And I'm like, okay, I understand. I can understand that. I've been jealous before. I'm a human being. But it's funny how it erases, again, common sense, because, you can't be then happy for that person. Your own inferiority inside of your ego is not allowing it to happen. I've learned that actually through some of my students. Some of my students that have gone on through college and university that are now playing and performing live are doing some amazing things. And sometimes I go, damn, they're out like kicking. But I look and I go, good, man, good for you. I'm so happy and enamored with the fact that somewhere along the lines, I was lucky enough to help you with your journey, because it's crazy to say, as a teacher and working with them, they helped me with my journey. My experience was just as important as theirs. So I think it's how we share in those things that, again, either says it's ego or it's prowess. There's nothing wrong with prowess in knowing that you're capable of doing something well, and you don't have to shove it in people's faces, you know. But I'm, you know, for me, it's like I was just at a party, somebody had a 60th, and so I just had a new single come out, and people were like, "Play the new single, play the new single," and I'm like, I don't know, you know, because there's people here and we should play. I'm not that kind of person. Like, if you want to put it on yourself, you go ahead, but I'm not going to sit there and grandstand. That's not what I'm about. If you like it, cool. If not, that's cool too. I'm good with it.
Oh, dude, I like you, Ed.
I like you too, Drew.
You're a cool guy, man. I like you. Shit, what was I going to ask next? So, and this is going to be out of left field, but so where along the way did the conspiracy or your awakening, like, kind of talk about what got you into, you know, how you see the world, or what do you think about the world, who runs the world, where along the way did that get introduced, and I guess where is it taking you down the rabbit hole or whatnot?
That's interesting, because there are a lot of rabbit holes. It was my dad and my uncle. My dad was the first federal coalition ever candidate in the history of Canadian federal politics. He won as an independent. Both Conservative and Liberal Party ousted their leaders and asked my dad to run as an independent in Ottawa, and he won. Before that, he was mayor of our township for over 30 years, police commissioner for 14 years, and chairman of York Region for 6. And he did this while he had multiple sclerosis and eventually succumbed to a brain tumor.
Wow.
So my uncle was a self-made man, came to this country with nothing, built an empire and a uranium mine and a uranium system that was so advanced that he had an immense deal with the federal government for selling uranium and uranium worldwide. He was a religious man and very devout to the practice of keeping all religions open and free for those that wanted to worship whichever way they felt was necessary. As a result, he was asked to be present at Vatican II, which is where they were talking about the divinity of Christ. So if you look into the books about Vatican II, you're going to see Stephen B. Roman is in there as one of the participants, because he was a theologian. He had a grade 3 education, and he did all of that in his life. As a result, he was approached by heads of state. Nixon ate at my uncle's house. Nixon ate my mom's potatoes. Brian Mulroney, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, you name it, were all part of my uncle's background and lifestyle. In the little sleepy town of Victoria Square that we grew up in, nobody had any idea that limousines and coming and going out of these epic gates into this location were just of those ilk, people that were from all over. At a very young age, after church, my uncle would hold services. He had a bishop that would come to the house every Sunday. I was an altar boy. And we would do church services until the Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which was built by my uncle in '84, and was actually blessed by Pope John Paul II, because before the Pope became the Pope, he was a priest. My uncle knew him in Poland. And as he graduated through the ranks of cardinal, bishop, and everything else, you know, they always maintained a tight friendship. So my uncle was back and forth to the Vatican on a regular basis, speaking with the Pope. He blessed the cornerstone of that cathedral. So after those church services on a regular basis, the family would sit around. Some would leave. Might be some Chivas Regal, fresh nuts, something like that sitting around. And I was 7 till the age of 19, privy to conversations about world events and issues that most people knew nothing about.
Yeah.
My dad alone had so many people come into this township office in the town of Markham to try to bribe him with thousands of dollars, and, you know, had to call the RCMP to have them, you know, removed, or the OPP. asked to run in a demographic against certain people through, other sort of clandestine organizations to split votes. My dad would never do it because he was so popular, and he was not just popular. He was respected as a public servant. My father didn't believe in the word politics or what politics represented. He believed that he was a servant of the people. And I tell you, if my dad were alive today, he would be prime minister of this country. So point being is that that's where I started to hear things that I didn't realize then what they meant or what they could mean. Go to college, study music, play, go out on the road, live my life, do what I need to do. So in my late 30s, I'm handed a lot of really influential books. People like, hey, have you ever heard of Michel de Nostradam? Have you ever heard of, Joseph Campbell? Have you ever heard of like Power of Myth? Have you ever heard of, it was always something new, always looking at information in different ways. I remember I got a videotape of a thing that Bill Cooper had done many years ago at one of his things, right? All these ideas and potential of certain things were coming from not only family members, but other people that I started to look at and respect in certain ways because of the research that they did. And that's really where I'm, for me, I know people say, well, you're a conspiratory freak or whatever it might be. Well, I mean, conspiracy theory. If you take the word conspiracy, it's a very valid word. There's been many conspiracies that have been well woven through time. We can sit here now, look back in history and go, well, that was probably a conspiracy. I can point out a number of them. But at the same time, a theory is an equation. It's an idea that the potential of something has, A, B may equal C. So, and if we put it to the test, the theory through observation and everything else, part of scientific method, could mean, yes, the potential of that theory is possible. But you put those two words together and it erases people's common sense about who you are, it seems. So I always try to very interesting line between I'm fact checking, I want to know the information, and I'm going to do my own research to try to figure out what that is and not take everything at face value. So when somebody says to me, hey, did you know that the Bushes are actually related to the Queen of England? I'd be like, no, really? So I start doing research and I start finding out, yeah, actually, other than them being of German descent, the Queen of England, that they are a 13th, 12th, and 11th cousin to Queen Elizabeth. So there's this family relationship that you start looking at. And then there are the family relationships that are out there that have been operating in the upper echelon for so many years that you start wondering and asking questions. Is this a part of the 1%ers? Is there something about this that we don't know? Why does this all seem so blatantly obvious, but yet we keep saying it's impossible? And I've talked to a bunch of detectives before, and I know a couple, and I'll be saying, like, hey, you know what? If you have two things that seem suspicious, you call that like a lead, right? And you follow that, yeah. So you can point out hundreds of different things and their connections to certain people, families, and organizations, and people still have a hard time maybe understanding what it may represent or possibly believing that the potential of that could exist. What I think more about all of this is that it's healthy to think about it all. It's healthy to question and not to just take everything at face value, because like there's a lot of research you could do on just simple things and realize they're incorrect. They're extremely incorrect. So that again, what is history written by the victors? Who are the victors? Is it commercialism? Is it some form of corporatism? Is it the 1%ers? Again, all of those things were illustrated at a very young age, and illustrated in a way by my uncle and my father protecting us. Somehow always saying no to these people. Hearing no, I said no to this. Can you believe that this happened? Da 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 da. It was always, they were being like courted or something in some way to be a parts of these groups. And so much so that even through religious organizations where people are very devout and pious about their beliefs, that those factions of those systems still exist. My uncle was a Knight of the Order of St. Gregory. And if you look in the hierarchy of the chapter of the Illuminati, whether or not he knew it or not, that is an aspect to that chapter. Dang. My mom and dad were Knights of Malta. They are also, you know, were respectively a part of that grouping of 12 or 13 different hierarchies inside of that system. And that's the way those systems tend to work. Because my uncle built churches, because he gave so much money to build, you know, churches around the world so people could have religious freedoms, he was also utilized, maybe in some ways, not through his own ignorance, because he obviously kept an arm's length from what it was, but like me, who gets called an egotist and utilizes the system like he utilizes me, so did he. He understood that in order to make it work, you have to become a part of it in order to be actually devout to your family, the people, and your idea of hope and potential. Because otherwise you can get sucked into it, and other people do. It's like politics. Politics works the same way. Do you realize when my dad is, this is in '84, the average federal MP was getting $1,000 a month. They were getting a free apartment, free airfare anywhere for their family across the country, free train fare anywhere for their family across the country. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars daily going out to public officials for their job. And they complain about the money that they make. My dad bought an apartment temporarily while he lived in Ottawa. He drove back and forth every weekend from Markham to Ottawa with my mom to that apartment so he could be with his family, still work on the farm, and go back, sit in the house all week and do that. He did that while he had multiple sclerosis. Didn't rent an apartment, didn't take the money, and he didn't take the apartment. But he knew federal MPs that were renting the apartment that were giving to them and making extra money on top of that. Taxpayers' dollars and abusing it outright just in their position alone. So back in '84, the kind of abuse that he even saw through the federal system and the lobbyist groups that were always pushing through corporations, especially for change and laws and they weren't thinking about the community, the country, and its fecundity. They were thinking about their own prosperity and gleaning their own money, or their own wallets. So I use my dad and my uncle as a great litmus test in my early education when it comes to thinking about all of that. And sometimes people are like, well, he's a Roman, he's, you know, Illuminati, or there's something like that, they got a weird light around him. That ain't it at all. That ain't it at all. My dad loves people, and he would do anything for anybody. He would give you the shirt off of his back. You find him at home in a pair of old polyester pants and a t-shirt on a Massey Ferguson 175 tractor. That's what my dad did. And he was so beat at the end of every day, he would collapse on the floor and sleep in front of a television. That's what I remember, my dad always being tired, always working and never around. And that's because he was so devout to his community. What part of the 1%ers does that represent?
Yeah.
That's another reason why he hated the idea of calling it even politics, because he called it polytricks. Multiple tricks, son. You know, the other person that I have to say was my grandfather. He was in the First World War, Austro-Hungarian. He was escaped from a prisoner of war camp twice. He was also shot in the leg. And he came from an old world time, you know, 1800s still, like turn of the century. Saw a lot of change. Came to a different country, new language, spoke 8 languages, was an engineer. Like he was an incredible, I put him in the category for me in my own mind is like Nikola Tesla. Like that's what my grandfather was, right? At Christmas, he would roll up his pant leg and he would show me this hole where the bullet passed through his calf and out of his shin. Oh. And I could feel it as a young kid, that empathetic feeling where it's like it almost makes your stomach hurt when you look at it. And he'd say, you see this, Eddie? And he'd smile at me sort of, and he'd go, you know what this is from? And I would be like, what? He goes, this is from a rich man's game. My grandfather was of the idea that you really want to fight a war between two countries, put both leaders together, the last person standing, that's the winner. Don't put your entire country in jeopardy just for your own ass. And I came from a background of people that believe those kinds of things and live them. So it's instilled in me today to keep asking questions and looking around, and maybe call them BS when I have to, or even navigating into that territory as the unwanted pilgrim, you know, just to find out what's going on. I think it's healthy to keep questioning. That's where it all comes from.
I think you're right there. And yeah, I mean, people, this blows my mind because I've never heard, you're the first person that I've heard that has had anybody that, you know, has been involved in politics. The word public servant, you don't hear that anymore. Like I cannot remember the last time I heard somebody, you know, I worked for several cities in the last 15 years. And that's the thing I always used to say is like, I want an award, a state award for what I did for youth programs and whatnot. And it always messed with my head. Cause like, listen, you know, the real people that won this award, like the volunteers and whatnot, but that word public servant, like I've never heard somebody like it just blows my mind that you mentioned that, because that's that kind of, there's your validation that you are sincere and that you're overall just genuine in your pursuit of what you said. It's healthy to question these things like that. I appreciate that you said that word. And I can tell
it's my dad. You can thank him for that, because it's like, again, if he hadn't participated in so much of it from a municipal to a federal level, I wouldn't have understood it completely. He saw enough of it to understand what it is. And again, wanted to do it. It's not something he just like, you want to hear something even crazier, man? The reason my dad entered politics to begin with is because he lost the card game.
Really?
There's a whole bunch of guys used to get together in our community, and they were sort of unhappy with who the mayor was at the time. And they were coaxing each other like, well, anybody could run and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So they said, okay, we're going to play. They always play cards, whatever, cribbage or whatever it was, right? So they're having a card game one night, and okay, whoever loses is going to run against the incumbent mayor. And it was my dad. And the funny thing was my dad was so lucky at cards that it almost seems like, what? You lost the game, and that's why you entered a lifetime of, you know, public service, is because he lost the card game. But, you know, the story of who he was in his own struggle, just as a person, especially, like, the other thing is, like, my dad was an unbelievable athlete. He was drafted by the Argos way back when as a star running back coming out of St. Michael's. He said, what am I going to do? Break my back and end up with a problem for $50,000 a year? That's what they were offering back then. We had a farm. There were so many other things. My dad's grandfather didn't want him to do it. He was like reluctant to do it. He was also like an incredible hockey player. Some of his friends were like Frank Mahovlich, and they roomed together. So I even get chills thinking about the things that my dad did in such a short period of time and died at such a young age, with all of that struggle going on inside of him. It's actually like the very thing that sometimes I feel with even my own problem that I have as a dyslexic with language. So it's the very struggle, again, that somehow makes you stronger and even more potent to be able to fight it all. The other thing is my dad was extremely passionate, but he was so calm when it came to debating and when it came to relevating an idea to the public that people almost didn't know how to understand him. Because, you know, there's nothing anybody could do that could turn his whistle to make him, you know, he'd just be so calm about everything. And that's another reason why I think the public stood behind him, because he was just like, I'm here to represent people. I'm not going to argue with you. Even if I think that my opinion is different than what the populace thinks, I have to go with what the populace thinks. It's not my decision. That's how democracy works. So he may have even gotten criticized for some of his decisions that he made and votes that he made in Parliament, but they weren't his. It was the public consensus. That's another job of how often the idea of what is the norm is dictated through the system, as opposed to the system saying this is what we require. And he was always trying to re-embellish that in some way by standing up for his communities. They wanted a mega dump. But he wasn't going to, like, right, you know, he got the entire township together, thousands of people on this farm field, and you know, said, no, we're not going to do it. Called the press. when Toronto was going to spill into Markham and absorb it, and our taxes were going to go up. My dad got an idea. It was funny and crazy, and it was humorous. He was like almost like Mark Twain. He got a cannon, and he went to Young and Steeles, and he pointed at the city of Toronto, made a public statement to Bill Davis, said, "If you come across this line, I'm going to fire this cannon at you." Who does that today? That would stand up to a premier just because the premier says, no, this is what's going to happen. My dad said, no, it's not going to happen. I'm going to keep taxes low for people in Markham. We'll bring in small industry. We'll do all these. We'll also create conservative pharmacological area that also can be sustainable for people living here. There's such vision about how to be. He was a conservative liberal, if you really want to call in any way, shape, or form as far as the political framework of thinking is concerned. He was a conservative mind by saying, look at all the prosperity that we have here. We can't just plow all over this. But he was liberal-minded enough to say, well, yeah, IBM can exist in Markham, and they did. Texas Instruments can exist in Markham, and they did. Pioneer can exist in Markham, and they did. Major national corporations set up their offices just because my dad had lunch with them and said, it's a good idea. He had that ability and again, hundreds of acres, hectares in Markham were still farmable when my dad was mayor. The greater part of Toronto doesn't realize that Markham was a breadbasket for supplying so much food to the greater metropolitan area for so many years. It's gone now. It's been completely turned into subdivisions. Some of the most prime farmland in this province in terms of microclimate farming, other than in Niagara, was all in Markham. So that's foresight to be able to say, you can have both. It doesn't have to, be. There was a problem with a synagogue and a mosque. They wanted both parking lots, and they wanted them to be big, and they were right next to each other, and they were fighting. It was like insane. My dad said, look, you worship on Saturday, you worship on Sunday, share the parking lot. They built a double wide parking lot in between the synagogue and the mosque, and there's no fighting. And everybody uses the parking lot, and there's twice as much space. So just even thinking that way to dissolve community issues was my dad's way of just simply calmly going and go, hey, we can do it. There's no problem. We can do it. We'll figure it out.
I don't know why, but this is what's being like thrown at me. Like hearing these stories, it's almost like when vision meets integrity, and you don't you don't see that in this world anymore. It's pretty cool.
It is there. It is there because I see it in municipalities. I know that's where people are listening to their constituents. People are doing hard work in those municipalities. That's where it should translate. The idea of politics is it should be kinetic. The country is the municipalities. It's the kids going to school, the parents, people working jobs, paying their mortgages, doing all that stuff. It should translate to a state and provincial level after that. So people are still being listened to. And then it should translate to a federal level. But often it doesn't. There's always this mandate, and everybody now has to follow. If you look up the word govern, government, to govern over, it means that you have sort of like the demographic or hierarchy of control over a system. But the government is the people. We the people. This is the statement, right? That this is why that statement probably exists in the forefront of a document so potent, look, in American culture. We the people. Yes, it is the government that is the people, not the government that is the people. The people are the government, excuse me. So we need to remember that. We need to continually remember that and just say no to things that look, I don't like going and voting every year or every 4 years and knowing that when I put my check mark wherever it is, even if it's every check mark, and I spoil my ballot, because spoiling your ballot is just as valid as voting for either side. It is just as important to air your disdainment and displeasure that you believe neither candidate is capable, which should be enough on a grand scale to call for a new election. Most people don't do that. They're going to choose one way or the other. That card goes into an electronic machine and it's counted. In my day, when I used to work and do canvassing and elections would happen, you had polling stations, counters, scrutineers, and an officer. That poll may not close until 4 o'clock in the morning, until all votes have been double counted by either an opposing And the officer that's there is scrutinizing to make sure there's no shenanigans going on, because physical people have been watching the process. Now it goes into a machine and it's tallied through a process like a counting machine for money. It's very dangerous to have that kind of a system counting votes, because it can always be altered. What do we do when we go to another country, when we bring democracy to somewhere and start a vote? Everybody dips their thumb because they've been a part of that system. There can be so much collusion of the outcome based on what that is. It's so important to I always say to people when I go to a voting station, I don't like this. I don't like the fact that my ballot goes into a machine. They say, no, your ballot's counted. We take it, we put it in, it goes in a box, and it's counted. Who counts it? A machine counts it. Who owns the machines?
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this in this craziest of ways, because I always use this as an example. So you've got Bush Sr., head of the CIA for 30 years. He's then vice president of the United States. He's president for 4 years. His son is president for 8 years. His other son, Jeb Bush, is head of Securicom. They are in charge of all the voting machines. You have the swayed vote in Florida that happened during that election. You've got a family that has been in federal system since the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. And then they're the ones that control Securicom, is the ones that are in charge. That means one family or one group has the ability to manipulate the outcome. It's the same reason why I say not having street currency is a very dangerous thing. We still have the ability to be able to trade that way in a very simplistic way without it being part of Bitcoin or some other digital format of things. I'm always about why create something, I'm not always about, create something new, let it flourish, but don't always call something that is working redundant, because maybe it's in position for a certain reason. And I said, like I say, question those things, because I don't feel comfortable knowing that my choice, my decision-making process is being scrutinized by a machine.
Not to mention Prescott Bush, was almost, he had his Union Banking Company shut down he was funneling money to the Nazis.
Vandenvar, that's Vandenvar as well.
Yeah, there you go. Here, let me, hold on. Barbara and I, little W, it is a big idea. It's a new world order.
You're good. That's
I always say that Bush's, Clinton was one. Listen, hey, I tell you, I was president for 8 years. So he kind of ran the show for me too. But
dude, you're on fire. You totally.
Yeah, I can do perfect. Yeah. I can do Nixon too. All effective immediately today at 5 p.m. I say that I will be resigning.
I am not a crook.
I am not a crook.
Yeah, so yeah, that whole thing makes me question, where does it come from? Why is it there? And there seems to be only one faction of one group of things or group of people that are in control of it. That's why my conspiratorial mind goes to those positions. And it's very hard to navigate. There's an incredible amount of information to look at before you can even discern from what is right and what's wrong inside of that. And even then, the spectrum of everything is changing so rapidly that it's almost hard to keep up with that pace.
Oh, yeah.
So, what's crazy? It's just like, I know we're getting close to the end of the show, but I've become a catastrophist. I'm like, Velikovsky, like in some of the early sort of guys talking about landscapes of catastrophe and these unbelievable, I'd say, apocryphal events, ekpyrosis and cataclysm, that have devastated the globe hundreds of thousands of times. It's given me a lot of comfort in the weirdest of ways, because what the universe has thrown at our beautiful ball is unbelievable. What we've done to it, even though it's terrible, almost seems insignificant. The potential of catastrophe is so present that we don't even realize it. Think of this. In the 90s, there's 2 different groups that went to Greenland and drilled 2 miles into the Greenland ice core to give us these isotope ratios of all different kinds of things. what the climate was like, how much oxygen, how much CO2, nanodiamonds, all these particles as a result of, you know, microsphericals, catastrophic events, melting things and doing all this stuff. But what it's told us is really something interesting. 200,000 years prior to about 13,500 BC, our climate was so unstable for at least 200,000 years. It fluctuated in every direction from 18 to 20 degrees into the negative, into the positive, within a 5-year to 10-year ratio. Jeez. Those isotope ratios are looking at a waveform of weather for 200,000 years that are doing this. And about 13,500 years ago, after what they call the Younger Dryas event, which is a huge impact that probably melted the Laurentide and the Cascadia ice sheets, as well as the Iso-Scandinavian sheets, greatly changed the geography, the oceans, everything that we know and we see today in this world, including extirpated most of the megafauna and megaflora all over North America. But what is basically is told me is that we've had stability, almost pure beauty, what do you want to call it, the Garden of Eden, for almost 13,000 years, pockmarked by some serious events, Middle Ages, stuff that happened in the 500s, even before that. But almost literally no change in our environment and climate that has promoted so much growth in so many ways for almost 13,000 years that in the weirdest of ways, that's why I say it gives me some comfort knowing that we're still here. Even after all that has happened, we're still surviving. We're still moving forward. We're still fighting. We're still, the need to exist will be and keep happening until there's some really catastrophic event. But that gives me hope in the human condition, that even at those moments where there's these things that have completely devastated, people have had to come together out of necessity for the very survival. And that's what I don't think we've experienced yet as people. This global plague, everything that's going on, and meltdown economically worldwide, all this stuff is nothing in comparison to what the cosmos can do to us in the craziest of ways. I don't look forward to any of that. I don't bring that up and giggle about it because I think it's a hopeful thing. I don't want anybody to be hurt, and I want there to be prosperity. But somehow that it's given me that sense of insignificance again, that I feel that it's important as a human. When I look up into the sky and the stars, I'm like, wow, you know, I feel about this big, you know, and what we're coming up to October, mid-October to November, we're going to move through the Taurid meteor stream. And it's like driving your car basically at, 80 miles an hour through the busiest intersection in your town, without stopping at the lights. That's what it's like, And I'm like, I'm horrified, and at the same time, I'm fascinated by it. It almost erases all of the other craziness that's going on here. I know that it exists. I know I'm going to be participating in it in some time, whether I'm wearing a mask or being affected by something else that's going on. But I embrace that insanity because it erases all that other negativity. It gives me that sense of awe, like a child again, where you're like, what? What happened? And I've hundreds of hours of information that I've looked at on some of this stuff. And a lot of these guys in their early years were called biblical literalists because they were like, it's the Noah flood. Well, you know what? It probably was. There's so many cultures around the world that share something that seems to have occurred around that moment in time. I can't remember the name of the American painter again, but he'd spent almost 30 years of his life with tons of Aboriginal people all over the United States, living with them and painting them and drawing and illustrating them. And one of his statements in his book that he had released, and it was like an autobiography, I think, but he was saying that, these cultures are all so vastly different. From the food that they eat, to the way they dance, to the stories that they tell, to whatever it might be. It's unbelievable, the tapestry of culture that exists in the United States with the Aboriginal cultures. But one thing they all share in common is this catastrophic event that basically deluged the entire area and created a new world. And this repetitiousness of recreating, it's like seasonal. It's so big and expansive as a human being, you can't understand it, but it is part of our equation. We're so defocused from understanding it. Some of the people that I've been talking to have said, we stand at the precipice in a moment in time where we have the ability, technology, the know-how to become cosmic, to recognize that the ball is home base, but we can move out into the cosmos to protect ourselves, to grow, to become non-infantile, if we so choose. There's so much, like you say, defocusing of things from materialism to people fighting, and here we can sit and talk, look at each other. People, like I said, from Singapore to Saskatoon can watch all this. We can do this in some amazing way. This, create a whole new interstellar idea of what a human being could be. We just need to focus on it. And somehow those crazy things are what, like, we go, yeah, damn, let's create a ring world. Let's like artificially spin it, and let's get some people living in space, and maybe we can grow some food out there. Like, we got to try this, right? Like, it's not just enough to have a shuttle, we got to be thinking even in a bigger way. And I think other people kind of are. It's just that it's not readily present in their language, like Bigelow, Musk. A lot of people that are, sometimes thinking crazy, way out of the box, and they got the cash and the potential to be able to do it. Maybe there's time. Maybe there's a way to make all that happen. So it gives me a lot of hope, that people can work together towards something to make it even better.
That's the goal, right? It's to leave the place a little better than how we found it, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Hey, what's your Facebook page, Ed? And give your website out too.
That's edroman.net. I got to say, first of all, thanks for having me. And I like talking to you. So I hope we hook up again and chat. I love being on the show. And Special Ed Roman is where you're going to find me on Twitter. Special Ed Roman is where you're going to find me on Instagram. Special Ed Roman is where you're going to find my YouTube. Special Ed Roman is where you're going to find my Facebook page. So usually it's all Special Ed, right? Dyslexic, Special Ed.
And I'll put all those in the show notes as well. And again, I'll have a little write-up about all the social media stuff and where to find you, and I'll put it on my website, and we'll get all that plugged. But I really appreciate you being here. I hope that we can do this again, like, real soon. This is a fantastic conversation. I would love to have you back on. So,
hey man, I love the opportunity, and I'm going to share it because I love having sharing a good conversation and great questions, because it took me down some interesting roads.
Well, that's good. I certainly I learned a hell of a lot from you tonight, and I respect you, I admire you, and I'm glad to be able to call you my friend now. So I really appreciate
this.
And,
man. Likewise,
it was really fun. We'll stay in touch after.
So you got to tell me, how is it down there in Kansas? What's going on right now? Give me a little.
Oh, Kansas it's Kansas. I mean, the economy is not all that well. Our government, or the state government here, is ranked 50 out of 50 as far as the pandemic response. It's terrible. There's lawsuits about to be launched against the state. There's people that have filed.
Who's your governor who's the governor right now?
Laura Kelly. And I was really, I voted for her. I was really enthusiastic. Haven't been all that impressed. And I said something today to somebody. I said, now I threw out the possibility of our leadership providing an actual leader a long time ago, but they can't even communicate their own, incompetence. It's funny. It's microcosm,
But it's true though. I know a lot of people voted for people with good intentions, but I think unfortunately, and my dad was one of the people that realized this, that as an independent, although he could speak for his constituents and still vote and do what he needed to do on bills and things like that, he was also limited. And by continually being asked to cross the floor into the conservative or the liberal party, meant he may have more push, but that also may mean he has to follow the party and tote the party line, which erases your potential for what you promised your constituents. And that's not uncommon for people to go, my hands are I can't do anything. Like, I even heard that from one statement from Jimmy Carter many years ago, with his position that he was when he was sitting either as governor or after that, when he actually became, the president. He was like, I can't get information from certain groups. Like, I'm the president. I should have access to this stuff. And he didn't. And it made him feel bad. I know he's got his memoirs out there and printed and stuff, but I'm sure he would be a really interesting cat to read up on.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to read Jimmy Carter's memoirs.
Dude, it's been really good talking to you, man.
Yeah, seriously, I really appreciate it. I hope we can do it again real soon. I love this. This is fantastic. It's fun.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah. So for the Drew World Order, our guest tonight was Ed Roman. Be sure to check out his social media links, and I will get those pushed in the show notes or whatnot. But Ed, appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too, man.